Out of Shadows is by a stuntman who was in the Hollywood industry for a long time, did a lot of cool stunts.
Oh, is this about how Hollywood's run by pedophiles?
Pedophile Satanists, yes. And there's interesting things, and I feel the same way about this that I do about David Icke, which is you make good, interesting, and I think compelling points that seem to be sometimes surrounded by ones that hurt credibility. All right, everybody, welcome to the podcast. We're here. We have a ton for you today. Should I go first?
Yeah, fire away.
So I watched a video last night that was Hank Green talking to Susan Wojcicki. Susan is the CEO of YouTube. Hank has been a creator for a long time. He does VidCon. And they spoke about some of the takedowns that were happening, and it was particularly around David Icke and Brian Rose. And I thought it was very interesting because he asks her, and he very much agrees with her that it was appropriate to take these things down. How did you decide to take these down? And her argument fell back on semantics. She said, well, we're in an epidemic, and we can't have conspiracy theories saying things that make people unhealthy, which misses the entirety of the argument, because the other argument is we are not in an epidemic, and I'm not supporting this, and it is in fact not a conspiracy theory. Yeah. So weirdly enough, it was just a way of languaging away the concerns of this group of people, which may be false completely, but I thought it was interesting from a how do we know it's true perspective that the powers that be just slap conspiracy theory on it, which might be true, and then dismiss it offhand. And that was the end of the question. I was shocked. And then he also follows up and he asks her, you know, this seems like a lot of power for one company to have, you know, and he agrees with her. He's like, I agree, this is, you know, we had to take these down. But this seems like a lot of power. How do you draw the line? She says, well, actually, it's a very competitive landscape. You know, there's Facebook and video, there's Twitch, there's all these other things. So we recognize. And I was like, David Icke got deplatformed within 24 hours on Facebook and YouTube.
Well, the same thing happened with Alex Jones.
Same thing happens with everyone.
I think the thing is, it seems like it's always Facebook that goes first. Mm-hmm. And then I think what YouTube's thing is once Facebook goes, YouTube feels like, okay, if we get blowback on this, we'll just hide behind Facebook and we'll do it together. It seems like YouTube is most scared to be the first mover.
Mm-hmm. So, and you know, Alex Jones was deplatformed from all of them within, I think, a 3-day span.
And you and I talked about this. So Brian Rose, who I don't know at all, but he's constantly saying, like, you know, they can't silence us. They did a really good job of silencing Alex Jones. Seriously, like, I haven't heard from him since. Yeah. He's not on Twitter. He's not on Facebook. He's not on YouTube. He is still, I think, publishing stuff on his own website.
He was on Brian Rose's thing. He can get onto other people's platforms.
If I were Brian Rose, I would tone down the "they can't silence us" because it seems like they very effectively could. Actually, they would just have to delete his YouTube channel. Yeah, and Brian would be quite silenced.
Yeah. So I thought I would love actually. I know we're not that big, but if Hank ever finds this, I'd love to talk to him about it because he does represent the side that. I think they refer to themselves as the science side, the side that believes science, but I would argue that they're the side that trusts in authority more than they're the side that has investigated the papers in a large degree. And maybe Hank himself has, but a lot of the people that argue that they're pro-science are really just pro-scientific authority.
Sure.
And so he had an interesting question, which I was like, whoa. He's like, I agree. Well, you know, one of the things on YouTube is we have to interrupt people's path down the rabbit hole. And I went, are you kidding me? Where is this patriarchal idea that you need to prevent people from encountering certain ideas, grown adults, that it is somehow the job of a handful of unelected people to prevent certain ideas from even being encountered for public benefit? That to me is insane. And again, I know in the previous episodes we were on here and we were semi-critical of Brian Rose and David Icke for what they said.
But not that they're not allowed to say it.
Not that they're not allowed to say it.
My only, like, Rationality Rules did it best, I think, which is he came out with a very simple set of explanations that go against some of the 5G claims, and you don't necessarily have to get to a cellular level to do the investigation yourself, which I think is the most useful, because when people are saying at a cellular level this COVID is actually this, it's like no one has looked under a microscope. Like David Icke is just quoting a scientist he likes. Someone who thinks that it's a different thing is quoting a scientist they like. Rationality Rules was cool because he just went, just look at the countries that have the most 5G. Are those the ones that have the most corona? So that's a nice way to argue against a conspiracy, I think, or to argue against anything. Not to just say, you're not allowed to have this belief, and if you do, I'm going to delete everything you ever create.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I think let the ideas fight themselves out. And what should happen is the most persuasive idea will win for most of the people. And by the way, some people will be completely unconvinced and will stick with the side that makes less sense, and that's okay.
Yeah, and I'm really surprised that we don't... I know it's tough, and I'd like to have a bit longer discussion about this, but that there aren't more people, and I kind of came out... I think that legally, you need to protect the marketplace of ideas. That you want to have a space where anybody can say anything. And I think that morally, it is up to each individual to check, be like, is this an idea that I should be shouting? You know, and this was kind of my potential criticism of Brian, was that there wasn't a lot of pushback. I think legally he should be within his rights to say whatever he wants to say, but I think on an individual level, to have someone up there saying something that, if wrong, could cause a lot of harm, and to not question in a deeper, more meaningful way is a personal, I don't want to say failure, but I think it could have been improved upon in this interview.
But maybe he's just not a critical guy. You know, maybe he's an agreeable guy.
And so I don't think he should be shut down necessarily.
Like, it's possible that anyone sits in front of him, and I've seen people like this. His method of interacting might be to just be easily convinced by someone in front of him. Yeah,
and I think this was Larry King's whole thing, is nobody ever knew where he stood, because he would just let the guest speak and just not even interrogate, just question to find out more of their work.
Oh yeah, I'm saying though, even beyond that, like, you're a philosophy major, incredibly bright.
I disagree with everything.
Your natural thing is anytime someone says something, you go, well, what would disprove that, right? Yeah. So I say 5G's linked to corona. The very first thing that you think, or one of them, is, okay, so then that would mean,
if that were the
case, then the places with the most 5G would have the most corona. That's your very first thought. Someone is just the opposite of you, just doesn't do any challenging to the ideas that are presented to them, and instead is very receptive to people they view as experts. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I was thinking that because I knew that I was going to come on this podcast having watched the Susan interview and sound completely different than I did after having watched the Icke interview, because all I do is disagree with whatever I hear.
But I was saying, like, Brian, like, maybe Brian's trying to maximize money.
Yeah.
Maybe Brian has these critical thoughts like Larry King, but doesn't say them because he doesn't think it's his place as an interview. Or maybe he's just, you know, very much at the time he's being spoken to by an expert going, sure, this all makes sense. And, like, there's no part of his brain that studied philosophy for 4 years and is constantly going, if that's true, what would it mean? If that's true, what would it mean? Which I think is a superpower of yours.
Well, thank you. And I would just say, on a personal level, I try to consider that there are people listening to me and speak in a different way when I'm in front of a camera than when I'm just casually making guesses about, you know, what stocks are going to go up or down. I would never say that on camera. And
Tanker stocks. I'm not a financial advisor.
My personal advice to him, if he ever saw this, would be to consider allowing the person to even formulate a better case by providing reasonable challenges to their position. Well, if this is the case, then why? And one of the big ones I had when I was watching the David Icke interview is, at what point did Bill Gates get pulled into the super psychopath cult? Like, how did they approach him? Was he 17, 18? Was it after Microsoft? Same thing with Elon Musk. When did they pull him in? When was his first ceremony where they did all these horrible things?
Or maybe he was a reptile since birth.
Yeah, did he have... And I think part of the reason I asked that question is because when you're forced to pin down and really imagine a scene where a otherwise normal human being is approached in that way, it becomes more difficult to believe. So it was interesting hearing them talk about public health and conspiracy theories. And if you're right, and the public health is on the side of this is a virus and we need to wear masks, then sure. But if David is right, public health concerns demand that you broadcast him far and wide. So it's just strange that there's this group of obviously ideological censors. And I'm not saying that they're wrong, but I am saying that they come from a very similar silicon pool, and they all decide on the same days what can and can't be said. What a coincidence, you know? Deciding what gets to be said publicly while retaining the status of impartial, unbiased platform that can't be sued for copyright infringement of stuff that goes up on their website. It seems wrong.
Well, so I have a question that I just thought of. So what do you do, or how do you combat the idea that people don't want their minds changed? And so I think of this because there was this YouTuber who was a flat earther, and he gave a video where he said, the earth is flat. It's absolutely flat. If I had a laser gyroscope, I think it's called, you would see that if a round earth moved, you could set this thing in such a way that it would shift 15 degrees every hour.
Yeah,
and
as it fell over the horizon.
And it wouldn't show that, which is how you know that this is fake. And the science is dead on. He's absolutely right. He goes, and I don't have this $20,000 equipment, but if I did, I could absolutely show you that the earth is flat. And so someone, I don't know who, sent him the $20,000 equipment. And he, to his credit, did the experiment. He said, yeah, let's do this, because he believed it. And it showed a 15-degree change over the hour, which is exactly what you would expect. And he said, this is, what I forgot to take into effect is that this is caused by movements in heavenly energies. And if I did this in a lead bunker, it wouldn't move 15 degrees, but I don't have a lead bunker. So my question is, we're all talking as if people are open-minded, right? That's like this weird assumption that we're talking about, that YouTube thinks, that you and I are saying. What do you do about the fact that people will, we talked about this on the last podcast, you could say, what can I do to change your mind? And they'll say, this $20,000 piece of equipment showing this would prove the earth is round. And then you get the $20,000 piece of equipment, you sit down with them, you run their experiment, and they go, I forgot about heavenly energies. Like, what do you do when people don't want to change their mind?
So the reason that we have a statement of something being right or wrong is because right things more effectively grasp reality. So if you try to launch a satellite with the belief that the earth is flat, you will probably not be very successful. If you try to, now, can you operate and go to the grocery store and do all sorts of things? Yes.
Well, you can also burn a 5G tower.
Yes.
So this is the thing. I agree with you. If you are going to try to make money, the right ideas will prove themselves out 100%, because the successful entrepreneurs, the successful businesses will be the ones that have reality back up their hypotheses.
Well, let's give one big argument. It's how tangible it is in your day-to-day. So there's obviously a huge schism in the world as to the belief of, is there a heavenly body up there watching over? Massive implications.
Yeah. My thing
it doesn't influence the
I'm
day-to-day.
saying, what do you do if you're YouTube? You don't want to censor this guy, but you know that no matter what you say, people will literally light $100 million towers on fire.
So here's the question that you have. Do you want a society run by a handful of educated technocrats with everyone's best interest in mind making decisions about what you can see? Or do you want a society that leaves it up to the potentially irrational, uninformed masses to decide their own best
So this is my question, if you're not going to have censorship, is there a way to change that guy's mind? Or do you just go,
think that
towers on fire is part of doing business. Part of owning 5G towers is that some of them will burn down. And that's your call as a business if you want to invest in this new technology.
So that business might lobby for different things, but it's more from a perspective of how do you run government.
No, I'm saying you're omnipotent and you're setting up the culture. Is the culture you set up just like, if you're going to be 5G, buy security. Get it?
So you're talking about culture and you're talking about government, which are two different things. If you can set up the culture, you set up the culture to be open-minded and explore different ideas and hesitate before committing an act of violence.
Okay, no, you can't. Unfortunately, well, this is I guess my question is, can you do that? Because it seems like, and that's just one anecdote of one flat earther.
Yeah.
It seems like you could show this rationality rules video that I found very convincing about 5G and Corona to a bunch of people who would be much less convinced than me. And it would basically just be whatever your belief is going into the video is your belief coming out of the video.
Yeah, well, this is tough. And the question that you're asking is, what is the role of government?
Or of YouTube, which acts as its own little government but is actually a corporation.
Is it to impose and protect certain ideas from being seen? And I don't know that it is. Maybe government will evolve into that, but originally what government was, it's like, here's people. They all individually have this fractured power, but they have things that they need to cooperate for, roads, whatever, war, etc. And so they form this body that only intervenes in edge cases. But day to day, it's like the rules of bartering and all of this kind of stuff. That they're just to enforce contracts. This is the libertarian idea of how at least government.
I was just thinking this isn't how it works at all. This isn't how it works at all. The government's literally just printing out trillions of dollars right now.
And you're right. It's also not how it historically arose. It was one strong guy who was just like, I'll tax you.
Yeah.
I'll take some of that.
Would you like protection from who? From me.
So I guess my answer, and we can talk about it, is that you need what's missing in all of these debates is a philosophical bedrock which people agree upon. So in the Hank Green, Susan Wojcicki, what they're missing is an epistemological bedrock. And that means, how do we know what we know? And how do we have a degree of certainty in what we know? Is it because there's 6 scientific papers on it and we go, now we know? Like, there's no consensus in how we're getting our certainty of truth. And the question here is a big one. What is the role of governing bodies? And it seems to me that there's a tremendous, even greater danger in a group of enlightened technocrats deciding everyone's best interest for them over the long run. Because sure, maybe they get coronavirus right. But what you have in China is a group of enlightened technocrats deciding what is good for everybody to see. And it's one step away from something that's good for you to something that's really good for them, but they've convinced themselves is good for you.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I think, unfortunately, you want a world where bad ideas could win in the short term. Mm-hmm. And the only way really to fight them is with more articulate, better ideas.
Well, that's not, so I agree with everything you said, except for the fact that you can fight them with more articulate, better ideas.
You might not win.
There will always be tens of thousands of people who are unconvinced and willing to take.
And we need them.
Sure. Set yourself up for violent action from them would be my only advice.
It's them or the technocrats.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm just saying there appears to be no amount of video evidence that will persuade them not to burn your towers.
Sure. And so you need a different approach. And you're not going to get all of them in a world with 7 billion.
When I saw this dude get the exact equipment he wanted and then be completely unconvinced because he forgot about heavenly energies, I went, cool, we should just completely stop trying to convince these people that 5G is or isn't connected to Corona, and we should just assume that they will remain unconvinced and then act accordingly. Well, get security for yourself or whatever it is, or get out of the industry. Yeah. Because you will not win by making a YouTube video that you think supports your point necessarily.
Sure. I think also the people that believe that 5G does not cause coronavirus are in the same boat. If you showed them evidence that it did, would remain, most of them would remain unconvinced.
That's what I'm saying. That's exactly what I'm saying.
On both sides, I'm saying. It's not like these people are the crazy ones.
No, that's exactly what I'm saying.
People don't change their mind.
You show rationality rules. It's a great video, I thought, but I came into it thinking Corona wasn't caused by 5G. But you show everyone this video, 95% of them will just leave it thinking what they thought beforehand, no matter what they were thinking beforehand.
It's tough. And so you're choosing between two evils, right? Do you want a top-down evil, potentially, where these people who are supposed to help you get the right answer eventually become corrupted, which is almost a guarantee? Or do you want this bottom-up, guaranteed, because there's going to be divisions in what people think and how they should organize the world? It's one or the other.
Let's fly on. I feel like we've beaten this to death. I find it fascinating.
Sure. So I just want to say before we hop on, thank you to our patrons. The reason that we are here today and not a week and a half from now or 2 weeks is because we actually hit our goal and blew by it. Special thanks to one patron in particular, whose name is Yusuf. He funded this entire episode.
So what is it per episode?
300
an episode.
Justin knows that because it goes to Justin.
Yeah, this is Justin's Patreon. So we're just trying to basically break even on the podcast to the extent the Patreon pays for Justin. We'll do more episodes. And someone came in and funded an entire $300 episode. So thank you very much, Yusuf.
Yes. And he asked, I said, what would you like? Is there anything you'd like to say? So we had a question, which we'll address later, but also mind.org.uk. He mentioned that he had a friend who was struggling with mental illness and he wanted to promote an organization that helps people with their mental difficulties. So if you'd like to check them out, potentially donate to that charity. Right now, there's a lot of people that are having mental issues as this world thing with the coronavirus pandemic, 5G, who knows, but people are struggling. So if you'd like to donate there, special shout out from our friend Yusuf. And he did mention, by the way, that he is not made of money, and this may be the last podcast that he's able to fully fund. So we absolutely appreciate everyone who already has. If you are open to donating more, we can do these more often, and we'll link to our Patreon for that. But thank you guys. It's been awesome. I'm happy to be here today and not 2 weeks from now because I wanted to share all this.
Cool.
I'll leave the link for the mind.uk or
mind.org.uk
in the description.
Cool. Your turn.
So have you seen that people are really, really upset that they have to wear masks in stores? Some people are adamant. There's protests about this. People are saying, I'm going to cancel my Costco membership because they're forcing me to wear a mask. Okay. It's fascinating how whatever our current set of rules is, whatever our current set of morality is, people just accept that almost unquestioning, and then they hate changes to it. So like we grew up in a time where it was okay to eat meat. You tell people not to eat meat, they lose their minds. They tell you that you're crazy. We grow up in an area where you have to wear shirts into stores. No one boycotts this. No one is having rallies about how insane it is that we have to wear shirts in the stores, which are actually, weirdly enough, there's less logic to that than to the mask.
Yeah, well, there's been plenty of times where you're in a hot day and it's one of these big warehouse stores that doesn't really have central air.
Yeah.
And I could take my shirt off quite comfortably in here.
And you wouldn't be, it's not indecent exposure, but people just accept, they go, I got to wear a shirt.
Yeah.
And that was the thing I thought was most fascinating. It's like, man, people are just hate new rules, new morality rules, new social rules, but they're totally cool with whatever
with arbitrary
they were born
old
into.
ones. Yeah, you're not wrong. I think that is 100% true, and you're right. The logic of wearing a shirt on your upper body, particularly as a man in the U.S. where it's not very sexualized, is strange. So let's do some more Corona. Let's do it.
Fire away.
I've been thinking about, you mentioned there's all these people that are in the stores and don't want to wear masks. There was protests in Huntington Beach. I heard that the local government near us in Huntington is suing the state government for shutting down the beach and affecting business. And my brother was in Huntington Beach and he said he watched people running onto the beach and then just running away from cops. So there were surfers that were literally just running on, trying to catch a wave. Cops would ride down the beach and then they just run away with their surfboards. And it was not protesting, but people were just not listening.
Yeah.
And it made me think that because I was listening to Nassim Taleb talk, and he has this idea of skin in the game, which basically says that if you're going to get the positive outcome of something without getting the negative outcome, you become a not credible source. So you think of people on television who might tell you what stock to buy, but aren't invested in that stock. They don't have skin in the game. Mm-hmm. And so I was wondering, there's a degree of natural skin in the game with any sort of virus, which I think is good, which is if you want to behave in a certain way, you personally run the risk of getting sick, and that's fine. The problem is that there's other people who can be affected by your behavior who you do not necessarily have skin in the game for.
Yep.
So I heard the suggestion that you should be able to opt into a program whereby the police come, they check your license, they mark you off, and what that does is it essentially puts you on a deprioritized list for a bed in a hospital or a ventilator.
I love it.
And it would never happen. And the specifics would need to be worked out. Maybe you have to pay a ton of extra money. Maybe you can do some sort of community service to get off of that list. Who knows? But I like that idea.
No, I love it. So you're saying, so like, for instance, there's a beach that's open. It's an hour and a half away. It's the only place I can surf within the law. So I just drive an hour and a half each way.
Say there's a beach right here.
No, this is today. I'm saying there is a beach here that's closed. Mm-hmm. You're saying I sign this paper. Instead of driving an hour and a half, I drive 15 minutes. But if I get Corona, they go, yeah, you knowingly ignored our rules. Mm-hmm. And so because of that, you will only get a hospital bed to the extent that everybody who hasn't signed this contract already has one.
Yes.
But if you come in and you're on a ventilator and then someone else comes in and they followed our rules, we're going to take you off the ventilator and give it to them.
Yeah.
I think that'd be awesome. And then I can decide how serious I think the coronavirus is.
Yeah, and it might not account for everything. If it doesn't, let me know. But what we're trying to protect against is we definitely want to allow people to make decisions that we might not agree with, but they decide to do because they're dangerous. If you want to skydive by yourself, you should be able to do that. And
it would be
risky?
Fascinating to see what this did to the numbers of people, because there's a lot of people going to these Corona protests, but in the back of their mind, they know if I'm wrong, I'm still getting to go to the hospital. Mm-hmm. It'd be fascinating to see what would happen if it was like, you win.
Yeah.
You don't even have to protest. You win. But if you're wrong, you're going to suffer the consequences. I actually think you'd see a lot of people put their hands down.
Yep, and this is happening on the other side as well. So there's people that want the lockdown to go longer, who maybe have a job or a financial circumstance that, of course, it's good for them, right? This limits their exposure. They get to hang out in whatever they consider a comfortable place.
Yeah, they got a raise because their unemployment's more than their job.
Or whatever, or they're a white-collar worker who can work for home. And so it's very easy for them to advocate. And this becomes the problem when you have community issues, is that people are necessarily asymmetrically skin in the game, right? So they don't have the same amount of upside as they do downside, and that leads to very different decisions. And so I don't know that it could practically work, but I love the idea of allowing people to make personal decisions that may harm themselves at their own behest while capping the downside to others. I wish it could happen.
Yeah, I think it's amazing.
I wish it could happen.
I'm a proponent.
Yeah. So that's just skin in the game.
Do it, Trump. Do it. Be amazing.
Black spot on the license.
Do it.
Yeah. So random other, do you want to hop in?
I don't even know what I got. You can go.
These are going to be all over the place.
Oh, mine's a random question. We can cut this if you don't have an answer. Why are there so many Nazi flags and Confederate flags at these protests that are happening in Michigan?
I don't know that there are. I have no idea. So I haven't seen anything, but I would be very skeptical of what is presented to you, because what's being presented to you is a partisan view, and the whole goal of the article or video that you saw is to convince you that those people are crazy. I know that for a fact. Whether it's right or wrong, that article had a point and it had a job to do.
Well, I just don't understand why the Nazi flag in general has made a comeback with any groups in the U.S. Like, I would have thought that they would all be flying the American flag with the argument, which could be a great argument, what you're doing is un-American.
I would almost guarantee there were more American flags at this rally than there were Nazi flags. And I think the fact that they didn't choose to emphasize that says more about the people writing the article than it does about the protesters. Now, maybe there was a protest that was straight up.
This was in Michigan, right? Let's see if we can get an overhead image. I'd love it if you were right. Let's see.
I don't know. I don't know, and I am ignorant as to what may have happened.
To me, it seems counter to your own interests. Like, if you're there to protest something, flying a Nazi flag seems like a really good way to just get people to ignore you. So I'm just shocked there's anyone who's flying a Nazi flag.
Yeah.
Like, even that you can get a photo of one.
Well, I think
you know what I'm saying?
It would be fascinating to ask. That I'd know. to understand, be like, what are you doing here? What does this...
Yeah, your goal is to convince the Michigan government to do what you would like to do. Mm-hmm. At what point did you think a Nazi flag would help?
Yeah.
With that argument?
Yeah.
Because it seems like there should be no Nazi flags. Just from a self-interested perspective. You want to get rid of the corona lockdown and go back to work. Why is this flag helping at all?
I don't know.
I don't get it at all. This seems like they should all be American flags.
I'd have to ask.
I have the same question with the Confederate flag.
It's a poor persuasion technique. That much we can agree upon.
How did you land on this? How did you land on that you would fly this Confederate flag instead of the 50... starred one.
Stars and stripes, yeah.
I can actually talk about the Nazi thing. I'm from Michigan.
Oh,
so
whoa. We have
I looked a decent amount into this. It's because they're likening the governor who's a Democrat to a Nazi.
See?
So they're saying Hail Whitmer.
So do you see that?
Yeah.
That is fascinating, because what that is completely shifts what your understanding of the article was. It does a 180 on the article, the way it was presented to you and you interpreted it.
Can I tell you what it reminds me of?
What?
When Charles Manson decided that the best way to get people convinced that his trial was the Nürburgring trial was to carve a swastika into his own head.
Yep.
I would still say not a good strategy for Charles Manson.
Horrible strategy, but also who would you argue is acting in worse behavior here? The reporter or news outlet who may understand the criticism and go, yeah, but I can get a cheap win here by likening these people to Nazis, or this is the difficulty with any sort of news article. Even if you attempt to do a good job, 80 to 90% of people will only see the photo and read the headline. So that controls perspective. And if you have 6 articles with similar photos and headlines, you can make someone look dumb or goofy or Nazi-like or whatever. This is a decent segue. I've noticed, so the question is always, what perceptions do I have about people and places I have no firsthand knowledge of? And then the really good question is, to whose benefit?
Well, what I would say, we kind of think about this when we're making content, is also like, to what extent is what I'm doing, can I take it out of context?
We think about this a lot.
Because someone had I just Googled it, someone had a sign that said like, Hail Whitmer, who's the
governor.
The governor, right? That's a great way to get across what you're trying to say, which is that he's the Nazi.
Yeah.
You holding a Nazi flag, less immediately apparent what you're going for, and much more easy to get taken out of context, painted as the bad guy or whatever.
Yeah.
So
let's say that they're holding both. And let's say that the cameraman just grabs the flag.
I'm saying the Nazi flag's a bad persuasion tactic.
Yes,
that's what I'm saying.
Period.
The sign is a better
100% on the same page. 100% on the same page. No doubt about that. And maybe there were people there that are truly white supremacists and were like, this is my chance to finally wave that Nazi flag I've been hiding in the attic. Who knows?
I guess maybe they're having the same. They're lacking the same thought, which is, what is the opposition going to do?
We only know this because we've had this done to us for years on YouTube, and we've had even just from well-meaning commenters who go, "Wait, when you said this, I thought that you would continue to the end of the video."
People don't assume that their opponents will act in bad faith.
or inadvertently take them out of context, or only listen to a part of what they said. Their world has consisted around of people that have to enter and exit the room, announcing they're coming and going, and you know exactly what they see, and you can read their face if they're disgusted with you and go, hold on, you're misinterpreting me. People are not ready for a world that is where they are broadcast to a bunch of people in a mass way. And I actually think it's going to become a good thing that more and more people are experiencing it, because what I know it did for me is it made me so much less judgmental over this kind of stuff, because I recognize that I'm never getting the full story. It's impossible. And it made me, so the question, and I'm sure you're going to feel the same way about this, is there a country in the world right now that you feel that everyone hates in America? Not a
North
country.
Korea.
Not a country, sorry. A government. That's a good one.
North Korea.
Okay, there's another one.
China.
Very good. I have not seen a Republican or a Democrat who is not very negative on the Chinese government. I think that's just, whether they did this on purpose or they're underreporting. It seems to be, and this might be completely fair criticism, but it very much reminds me, and I think is indicative, that we are in a second Cold War. Because that is exactly the perception that everyone in America had of the USSR. Rightly or wrongly, I'm not here to comment. It's almost secondary to the
That
fact.
Cold War never ended. I think most people actually would be critical of the Russian government as well.
It kind of paused. There was a Boris Yeltsin for a while.
It's back with Putin.
Yeah.
I think most Republicans and Democrats, if you're like, how do you feel about the Russian government? They go, he's a bad guy. They're bad people.
Mm-hmm. You may be right there. But yeah, not to comment that we're wrong to think this about China, but when everybody is broadcasting the same belief, and I've never really been there. I spent 3 days in Hong Kong, and I have such strong background feelings about a place. I think it's a unfortunate sign for where geopolitics is headed. When it's just universal, it's going to be some sort of Cold War. I also read.
Well, it doesn't mean you're wrong. It just means you're in an echo chamber, right?
Yes, it means that everybody has the same belief. And it's also indicative, of a different period of history where this is the feeling. The other article was writing about how Hungary, the country, is no longer a democracy, as according to some NGO that designates democracies, because they've ceded a ton of power over to the president, and he can, according to this, send people to jail for saying things that the coronavirus is not real or whatever. And they're also, according to this article, which has an agenda, of course, receiving tons of support from China in the form of face masks and ventilators. If we take that to be true-ish, you see the same thing that happened in the Cold War, which is there's this scramble for allies going on. There's this scramble for which way are you going to run your government, and does it more closely match ours or theirs, and can we send you enough things to have you on our side? So I was just bummed because we had a fairly long period of no big hot wars between superpowers. There were smaller conflicts, obviously.
That was just the U.S. government making wars out of nothing so they could steal oil lands.
Yeah. Well, actually, I told you this, but I think it's worth saying. I asked you this question. The most deadly conflict since World War II. Do you remember?
Yeah, I do remember, but I didn't know it until you told me it.
It was the Congo War. In 1996 and 7, over 1 million people died, and it happened right after the Rwandan genocide, which essentially was a continuation of this, but they're treated separately. There were 2 Congo wars. It hasn't stopped. Just fascinating that in terms of...
No one interferes.
Of human suffering. Well, we were in Mogadishu way before this with Black Hawk Down, and so there's the argument, okay, we don't want to mess around because 30 Americans died, but millions and millions of Africans. This is where the child soldiers as young as 7 are being sent in to fight, and it's just not covered.
No, it's kind of similar to the thing I was talking about earlier with if you think that Corona and 5G are linked, then they should correlate. If you think that the U.S. is a good police officer for the world, not acting in its own self-interests, we can test that hypothesis.
Yeah.
Look at the worst things that are happening in the world. That should have the highest concentration of U.S. military.
Or focus, at least. Yeah.
Oh, it's weird. It doesn't. Well, I guess that hypothesis is busted. You know what I mean? Like you can, without really having to do a bunch of science, just go, okay, well, what would this look like if it were true that the U.S. really is trying its best to be a police officer for the good of all of humanity? The most U.S. focus would just go to the most human suffering.
Yeah.
that's not what you see. So you need an alternative hypothesis.
And instead we had the axis of evil. I'm not saying that...
I love the U.S., by the way. I
Yeah.
feel like I'm coming off anti-American, but I'm really just trying to more posit, like, that doesn't show up. Like, that hypothesis doesn't work if you project what it would mean and then you look at the world.
Yeah, so I that was sad. I watched a YouTube video on the history of Africa over the last 20, 30 years, and it's so horrible in terms of just of not tribal. It's, I guess they're at this point, like, I don't know if they're different races, but the Hutus and the Tutsis, I don't know what the categorizations are, just back and forth, and somebody gets power, and then they commit a genocide, but then the rebels come back and they commit a genocide, and then they get other countries to come in and support them. And it's, yeah, nobody talks about it or cares. And very shortly after, we decided that the axis of evil was Iran, Iraq, and North Korea, which maybe you can make an argument for North Korea, but even, and not that the other places are good, but like, can you count? You see how many people are dying over here? So I don't have an answer to it other than the news is, it's tough to be engaged with the news, because I think it gives you a skewed view of the world, and not necessarily one that is best for helping. So random, anything else that you got?
Oh, yeah.
I have so much, dude. It's in like 14 days.
Go ahead.
So people had recommended, this is another one. I feel like this is a very heavy episode. Out of Shadows. Did I tell you about this?
No.
So Out of Shadows is by a stuntman who was in the Hollywood industry for a long time, did a lot of cool stunts.
Oh, is this about how Hollywood's run by pedophiles?
Pedophile Satanists, yes. And there's interesting things, and I feel the same way about this that I do about David Icke, which is you make good, interesting, and I think compelling points that seem to be sometimes surrounded by ones that hurt credibility. So, for instance, just
you're saying some of the points are good.
Some of the points, yeah. And I'm not going to make a declaration of what percentage, but so what are the claims that he makes that I thought were interesting? That
Is this the pizza party guy?
This is the Pizzagate guy. Yeah. So he talks about Pizzagate. I don't want to go into it. That's old news. He talks about the Epstein. Perhaps the most interesting thing is the insinuation that Epstein was had been contacted by the CIA to get dirt on famous people. And so the part of the reason that he was so quickly taken care of is because he not only would have indicted famous people, he would have pointed the finger back at the CIA and said they were paying me or I was somehow being coerced. And the CIA knew that there were a handful of pedophiles or a lot of pedophiles involved in that, which I found, while not 100% certainly true, a compelling theory.
Well, this is my thing. If that were true, so if I have dirt on famous people, I don't necessarily think they're going to kill me. If I have dirt on the CIA, I do think they're going to kill me.
Yeah.
If Jeffrey Epstein thought he was going to die, you'd think he would have come out with it sooner, is the only thing. Like,
With what sooner?
The dirt, whatever the dirt was. Like,
maybe he thought they'd let him live, or no, because here's the thing. Hey, Jeffrey, they get to him. Here's the deal. You are going to die in the next 3 days. And that's if you don't say anything. If you do say anything, everyone you know is going to die in the next 3 days. Your choice. I mean, there are things worse than death. And you can control an individual. This is the point that they, I think, effectively make, which is if you can really blackmail someone, like really get it, you can control them. You control 99% of the people to the end of their days. Very few people are like, you know what? I did that horrible thing and I'm ready to suffer the consequences of it. I'm ready to go to jail. I'm ready to face whatever thing. So that is certainly possible that he would have shut up for long enough to not do that. And I'm not saying that this is the case, but they talked about MK Ultra, which I thought was interesting because Joe Rogan had a guy on who also spoke about MK Ultra, its potential connection to Charles Manson. And if you're not familiar with MK Ultra, you've seen Stranger Things. It's kind of
I've never seen Stranger Things.
Okay, it's dramatized in Stranger Things. It's essentially the CIA program whose goal was to see if they could do a number of things.
Is that why the girl has mind powers?
Yeah.
She's from MK Ultra?
She's from MK Ultra.
Fascinating. Never knew that.
Just throw a spoiler alert up before this. It's an old show, but so they were trying to do a number of things, and this is according to the Joe Rogan interview. See if they could implant memories in people's heads to get them to think that they'd done things. See if they could take away memories so that they could have you do something and then not know. Seeing if they could get people to commit acts of violence that were so far outside of their normal thing. And the goal would be Manchurian candidate type stuff to assassinate people. And a lot of this came out in a hearing. They had evidence that they were taking regular Americans, they were using brothels as to lure guys in with one-way glass, giving them, like, dosing them with LSD, and then just watching them for 8 hours and sending them back on the street, right? They were drugging American citizens. They were doing things that were so far beyond
8 hours at a brothel.
I don't know how long at the brothel.
A lot.
Sorry, I made the hours up. But they were doing things that were so far beyond the pale of, like, to American citizens that were unwilling, and yes, like, to American citizens. They had college students doing it who were, like, excited about the findings, and they have journals from these college students. Allegedly. Maybe this guy made it all up. Again, I maintain a degree of everything about everything could be wrong.
Yeah.
But he seemed to be a credible source. And what he said, he's like, the biggest thing about MKUltra is they had to admit a lot of this, and they burned a lot of the documents. What we have are the receipts for the stuff we bought. So we could see, like, one-way glass, San Francisco, like 6 tablets of LSD. So we can piece together the story. But the biggest thing is that they said nothing worked. And that was kind of taken as the standard line, which is, oh, the CIA, this crazy, goofy organization, they couldn't get anything to work. And he said, I think the biggest thing that is potentially, this speculation sold about MKUltra, is that it didn't work. Is that they may have, in fact, found ways to implant memories or not do this that did work. And so this guy references MKUltra in a handful of things. He also makes claims that I feel are unnecessary to what some of his central theses may be. So I don't want to...
Sorry, you're saying... I kind of lost the thread here. You're saying that he's claiming that Hollywood child pedophiles have ties to MKUltra.
He is all over the place.
Because when I put it like that, it sounds a little bit crazy.
He's all over the place. He touches on that there is a Satanists. He touches on Pizzagate. He touches on the elite pedophile ring. He talks about how Disney has been implanting subliminal messages of sex, like the penis in the Little Mermaid thing, and sex in the clouds of Lion King. I mean, he touches on so many things that he kind of lacks a central thesis. So I'm struggling to say what his point was, but I'm picking the things that I did think were interesting in trying to form a narrative that I find potentially compelling. Because I do think there were some, I'm not here to rip this guy apart, but there were some issues in his presentation and his layout of some of this stuff. But I thought that was interesting, the MKUltra Epstein connection, and generally the idea that the CIA is not your buddy.
Yeah.
The CIA is doing things.
Well, you know what's crazy to think about is, so I just watched American Made with Tom Cruise. It's loosely based on a true story, but a lot of it is, I'm sure, not true. But it's about this guy that was supposed to run guns down to Central America for the U.S. government so that they could try to overthrow a communist regime. And it's the CIA is basically hiring this private citizen to do it. I won't give away the movie, but at the end, they just go, yeah, we're ready to fuck this guy. This guy hasn't been following instructions, and we're ready for him to kind of like disappear. And they just go burn the documents.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, there's no cloud. Mm-hmm. I don't even know if they have flash drives. When you burn the documents, it never happened. And so this guy goes out and he says, oh, I was working for the CIA. And it's, no, you weren't.
Yeah.
Like, every shred of evidence about that has been put on fire, and there is nothing you can do. Yeah. And it's so fascinating to think about the world before constant surveillance. Like, even his evidence is taken with a camera, no video cameras. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And it's just weird because in this world, you just assume everything's backed up, everything's in the cloud, everything's on video. And so you feel, and I'm not saying that it's true, but you feel a greater sense of the government wouldn't be able to completely disappear you. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Because there's just your Facebook and Instagram are out there.
Yeah.
And for this guy, it's just like 20 years of work is done. Just on fire, and you were never involved. The CIA has nothing to do with you. And he says, find Schechter. Go find, and they're going,
Schechter doesn't exist.
That's not a person, and truly, that's not a person in the CIA.
Yeah. He gave you a
wrong name, and now you're just done. You know what I mean? Now it's prison for you. And I thought that was really interesting to think about a world before the cloud.
Well, I'm sure that there's ways around it and ways to burn, quote unquote, burn digital evidence as well. The thing that I think is perhaps, because we're deep into speculative territory about what happened with the CIA in the past, but I don't think it's widely argued that they were involved with arming a lot of the Contras in Latin America. I don't think it's argued that they didn't play a big hand in taking down an Iranian government democratically elected, Chilean government democratically elected, that they didn't arm the Contras in the Bay of Pigs that immediately got slaughtered by Fidel Castro, that the CIA has this long history of doing potentially unethical things and messing up. And it's like, oh, they blew it there. They weren't successful. And it's interesting to think that we may only know of the things they publicly got wrong, and we're not aware of so many of the things that went well for them that might have been weird double dealing under the table.
Given where the U.S. is, I would assume that their win record is above 50%.
Yes.
I would assume that they have more wins than losses.
Yeah. And what counts as a win? Is it a win when you can take an American citizen, erase a memory, have him kill someone, and then convince him that he's a schizophrenic, crazy person? Like, is that we don't know. And again,
That's a clear win.
I'm deep into speculative territory.
Win, dude.
So I bring that up because I was thinking that last time we're
absolutely getting disappeared after this episode. It's been way too anti-American.
No.
We're gonna wake up having killed ourselves with a shotgun to the back of the head.
Yeah. So here's let me try to tie this all together. I know we've been all over the place. There's this 5G David Icke stuff going on, and people have two gut reactions. One is I knew it, and the other is that is the most ridiculous, crazy thing ever. And where I'm trying to find myself is in the space of this would take quite a bit of coordination from a lot of people, and there's reasons that you mentioned that 5G seems to not be totally correlated with coronavirus cases that seemingly need to really be addressed for this to be taken seriously. Mm-hmm. The other is an understanding that...
Well, you just say the data's not real.
Sure.
Is how you would address it. But then you would rely on that data to later make your point when talking about where it does make sense.
Yeah, and so that leads me to dismiss it or just find it not compelling. On the other hand, there's a very real history that we all seem to agree upon of abuses by governmental bodies, not just around the world, but our own, in the name of I don't know what, in the name of accruing even more power and pursuing whatever agenda somebody has. So I don't have a definitive answer on all of this, but I guess it's not crazy for people to think that the government or branches of the government might be doing highly unethical things that aren't in their best interest. Where for Corona and 5G, I don't have a particular answer, but I guess I can see why people might be so skeptical of the official story, because the official story has been proven to be BS in many occasions. Does that make sense?
Sure, yeah. My thing is just think about incentives.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It doesn't really make sense if your goal is to create a technology and profit off it for that technology to kill a bunch of your clients. I would just say it's incentives, CIA incentives. Would it make sense for them to want Manchurian candidates? Yeah, I could see as a government how it'd be cool to never have to risk your own people because you could. Okay, so like, is it plausible? The motives there, at least. You know, like I like thinking about the motives, and then that doesn't prove anything, but I can find it persuasive enough to disprove a theory if the incentives don't really make sense.
Yeah, let's wind down with this, but that's a great point. So when I watch David Icke, one of the big questions I have is Bill Gates has God knows how many billions of dollars. He could do whatever he wants. He still, though, what do people do with a lot of money? They have a lot of promiscuous sex. They
buy boats.
They, what do they do? I guess sometimes they kill their enemies. They buy a bunch of toys. They try to live a life
at the highest level. They disappear from the limelight. They buy a basketball team. They buy a private island. And they ghost. You only hear about Steve Ballmer when he's at Clippers games. Richard Branson, you only hear about
when he has a TV show.
When he's doing crazy extreme sports with Obama. But they're not out generally trying to do things that
this is where I run into, and maybe I just can't understand the mind of a super psychopath, as he puts it, but to have $100 million and go, you know what I need? $100 billion, and to go, you know what I need? To kill everyone and control them with a vaccine. It's like, you can control everyone with your money. You could have people stand on their head upside down all day in your place to the day that you died because you felt like it without spending a fraction of your money. So
we lived in Vegas. We people with a lot less money than Bill Gates were having people...
Let's wind down with this.
We're having people crawl around on the floor wearing leashes, barking like dogs.
There was a guy in Vegas who was well known to have, I think he had maybe a couple $100 million, but not $1 billion. And he would come in and he would take the most beautiful women who worked at the clubs and he would do some perverted games where he would give them all 5 figures, solid 5 figures, and he would insist first that they would gamble it all. So he'd watch them take more money than they'd have and freak out losing it or winning it or doubling it. And then he would have things where he would have them like crawl around picking up more money.
But yeah, they had to wear a leash and crawl around picking it up with their mouth.
Yeah.
Just for some reason, he just really liked to degrade people.
Yes. And
he didn't have to do it with vaccines.
No
he just did it with his money.
problem getting people to line up to do that. He had no issue, and he wasn't anywhere near the 100 billion. So I don't understand what additional power Bill Gates could possibly accrue.
And what you're immediately writing off is that he is genuinely a reptile, a Satanist, someone who has incentives completely different from your own. Because he desires to see the world burn for his reptilian or Satanist end goals.
Yeah.
Which I think is fair.
Yeah, I don't know what the reptiles want. That's what a reptile would say. All right, so let's go. So let's hop into questions right now. I feel like we were all over the place. I apologize.
Oh yeah, so many cuts for you, Justin.
I apologize for the
I have some other stuff, but we can talk about it. No, do it. It's literally all stuff we've already talked about, so I can just save it till next episode.
Okay. So I want to touch on. So we had Yusuf, who had basically funded this episode. He asked a question in the comments. I thought it was a decent question, which we could start with for today. Yeah. He was looking for 2 book recommendations. The first is related to mastery of a variety of different subjects, and let's start with that. Any good book recommendations?
Yeah, I really liked The Art of Learning by Josh. I'm going to mispronounce his name. Waitzkin, I think. He's the guy that Searching for Bobby Fischer is based on. He was a chess prodigy that then became a jiu-jitsu prodigy, and the fact that he was able to become so good at both convinced me he's really good at learning skills. And so I really liked that book when I was younger.
The Art of Learning. So yeah, if you're interested in mastery, I think that's a good one. If you're insistent, there's another one called Mastery by, I think his name is Leonard. I was going to say Leonard Cohen, George Leonard. I don't know. If any of the words Cohen, Leonard, or George are in there, that's your guy.
That's your guy. If not, it might still be your guy.
It talks about plateaus.
It's called Mastery.
It's called Mastery, yeah.
George Leonard.
George Leonard. Woo!
Everything's in the description.
Just like we said.
Yeah, so that's a good one related to mastery. And the second one, the question, and I hope I'm getting it right, is...
Oh, can I say something else about mastery real quick?
Absolutely.
So in my own experience, the greatest thing I have done for mastery is find people that are really good teachers of it and learn from it. So like, for instance, reading The Art of Learning, very helpful. When I became really good at jiu-jitsu, it's because the Gracie brothers have something called Gracie University. And I had taken lessons in person from multiple black belts in multiple continents. And that online course, hands down, the fastest and best I've ever gotten at jiu-jitsu. Same with surfing. Surfing, I had a bunch of instructors. Some were bad, some were good. I was watching videos online, and I found one good coach and immediately became a lot better. So I think for me, the best thing to do to become a master of something or learn a skill, start with the foundations, art of learning, mastery, learn how learning works, but then very quickly test a bunch of instructors and make cuts if they don't seem good. Because when you find one that's good, 5x your learning curve. Like it's just a world of difference.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Gracie University is so good. Yeah, it's so much better than the classes I went to. And I'm going to break from the book recommendation to talk about some of the tenets of mastery. One of the tenets is do it perfect slowly before going fast. So one of the big problems with jiu-jitsu classes is you'll often do 10 minutes of drilling and then you'll just roll, and you haven't perfected the Americana really slow. And one of the excellent things about Gracie University is that they make you do it slow a bunch of times, and it is so much more effective. The second thing is this is going to be slightly different from in every discipline, but there's an order and a structure that is best what I was gonna say. To learn in. I think Tim Ferriss may talk about this in 4 Hour Chef, but again, the Gracies do it the right way. They've been teaching for a long time. So
no, it's huge, man. I mean, in jiu-jitsu, if you find yourself on the bottom a lot because you're just getting crushed and you don't know how to stop a takedown, and then what you drill is how to attack from the top. It's even if you get good at it, you will never get to do it. And I see this with surfing too. Surfers that are like trying to figure out how to do certain turns. Dude, you can't pop up consistently. Like you need to forget this. And in a lot of things, in most things, there is an order that will make your learning progress so much faster.
So just as an example, when you're doing jiu-jitsu, you start on the bottom in the worst position, which is where you're going to find yourself most of the time.
If you suck, it's where you're going to be. But if you're very, very good at reversing that position,
now
you're in the second worst position.
Yeah.
And then you can learn what to do from there.
Yeah.
And that's what Gracie University does really well. I'm not affiliated with them at all, but no, I see this a lot in a lot of different learnings. People will try to just hop into the sexiest thing that they want to learn. Mm-hmm. And it's like if you were trying to learn how to do something charismatic mid-conversation, but you're terrified of starting a conversation.
Yeah, we start with first impressions. We don't start with
exactly. Telling a captivating story is a great skill only if you can get in conversation such that people will listen to you start a story. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So yeah, that order is huge.
So let me see. So this is big, and piano was one, and guitar as well. People always want to play the song to speed. That was my first piece. Get it right slow then. Second thing is definitely the structure and the order. You got to find a good teacher for that. I feel like I need a third thing to have this be a rounded out perfect 3.
Oh, I'd say one thing I like, do little drills, 5-minute drills a day. So much more useful than 2 hours once a week. So surfing's a great example because you have to go out in the ocean. It's a huge hassle. Put on a wetsuit, drive to it. So what a lot of people do for surfing is they will just go once a week and never get better. And you can do little things like buy a skateboard that is designed to be like a surfboard and practice for 5 minutes a day. Same with jiu-jitsu. Maybe you can't go to class for an hour a day, but there is a hip sprawl drill you can do for 5 minutes. And in any skill, charisma is the same thing. You don't want to go out to a bar or give a speech every day. Absolutely reasonable. But there's little things you can practice in a mirror in front of a camera for literally 5 minutes. And then when you get to the big moment of the jiu-jitsu class, the surfing, the actual conversation, you will do so much better, which will make it so much more fun, which makes it rewarding, which makes you want to continue. So that's I think a huge thing, is just finding the thing that takes literally 5 minutes that you can do 7 days a week. I mean, multiples faster in terms of skill acquisition than if you just try to do it in 1 to 2 hour chunks infrequently.
For all you students out there, this is true of studying as well. So the art of studying and learning anything is basically the art of forgetting and re-remembering, because you do it and you forget it. So can you technically cram right before a test and have something for 15 minutes, blow it out and do a test?
Can I tell you why I think it's different? So I'm a crammer. I crushed college without going to class sometimes, but you can memorize everything, take the test and get an A.
Spit it back out.
And then you forget it all a week later. So for test taking, it's great, but for skill acquisition, it's terrible, because I literally would forget what I had just gotten an A on 2 weeks later. I would fail that test if given it again, which I think for skill acquisition, you're not trying to impress a teacher. You're trying to do something well over time. And that's where cramming really fails.
So then let's go to the second question, which is he's asking, and if I get this wrong, I apologize. He's wondering how to do his own thing, as he puts it. And he says that in the past, he's felt that he's had a very specific goal in mind, and he doesn't really have a specific goal, so he doesn't know how to do his own thing. So to me, this question is like, how do I find my thing, and then what do I like? What should I orient myself towards?
So the question is not.
That's how I'm interpreting.
The question is not how do I start my own business. My question is,
I told him 4 hour work week.
Literally, I'm 23 and I'm not sure what I want my life to look like. What should I do to figure out what it should look like?
That's how I'm reading it. If it is business related, 4 hour work week is the best place to start, in my opinion. But let's presume that this is the question.
Well, one, if it is business related too, running lean is nice because it's a literal step-by-step playbook, which is pretty cool. Okay, so the question is, how do I figure out what I want? I mean, I think in general, what you do for your money or whatever is just a means to a lifestyle. It's kind of how I think about it. So I think the first thing to do is, what would your ideal lifestyle look like, right? So if your ideal lifestyle, for instance, is to live 3 months in Brazil, 3 months in Bali, 3 months in Norway, immediately that is going to cut away a lot of options that would involve, like our friend runs a bone broth company that has factories, right? Well, you can't do that. So I think knowing what lifestyle you want is probably the first thing I would do. So brainstorm that. And then...
and just concretely, I know I've done this. Write down, if you can, your perfect day starting from when you wake up. And if you want, you can even extrapolate that to a perfect week, because every day might not be exactly the same. That'll give you a good idea of how to orient yourself.
No, great point. That's what I was trying to say. Because if your goal is if you're like, my end goal is, I don't mind working really hard this year, but I want $10 million in 10 years. Every decision you make is going to be so different than if your goal is, I want to wake up when I want, live where I want, spend most of my time not working. Every decision you make is going to be informed by that. And I think sometimes if you don't define that, you can just get given other people's dreams, which you'll then chase.
Yeah. So yeah, in terms of books you asked specifically, I think we've given you enough books. I think that exercise is where I would start. And then depending on where you land, which is I need my own business, or I just want to be a teacher, or then read the book that is most related to that. Cool. Let's do some questions. Thank you, Yusuf.
So another Patreon question. 3 years ago, I made the decision to start pursuing a different career in cybersecurity. My ultimate goal has been to join a particular government agency and has guided my decisions to leave my old job, move to a new city by myself, and start grad school. What draws me to that agency and cybersecurity in general is a sense of purpose it offers. I have a desire to protect people and do what I consider to be important work, as well as work with the best of the best. However, it's a competitive process and far from a certain thing. Last night, I couldn't sleep due to the anxiety I felt over the idea of not achieving this dream. I do not think I could be happy working in an organization that is primarily concerned with profit because it does not fulfill my sense of purpose, but that might be what I end up in out of necessity. You have spoken before on the idea of achieving what we want versus being guaranteed happiness and how people will choose the former, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts. How can I change this narrow paradigm that I'm in currently?
Got it. Well, sorry for everything we said about the CIA. I'm sure that the CIA does good stuff.
I think what's interesting is I would say you're on a great path, which is you're learning a skill, the skill of cybersecurity. So the government doesn't have to give you permission to do good things. You can, so let's say you get the government job. Awesome. Okay, now let's say you don't get the government job. Okay, I want to help people. So instead of going for a corporation that you think is trying to maximize profits, look for one that has a culture that you like, that has people similarly minded to you. Okay, there's not a single company like that exists. Start your own.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I don't want to start my own company because I don't want to have to worry about employees. Do a very small one-person freelance job. What's really cool is when you're starting with the skill set of learning how to help people with online security, and your goal is to help people, you can, as long as you keep that goal in mind and don't let prestige and money take you off of your path, you can do it no matter what. You don't need anyone's permission to use your skill set to help people. So I think you're in a great position.
Yeah. I think one of the guaranteed ways to be upset, anxious, and miserable is to convince yourself that a gatekeeper is the person who controls your ability to do what you want or to be happy.
Yeah.
And I've done it. And people do it with, if I could get this particular guy or girl to like me, then I would have the right boyfriend, and you'll be miserable. If I can get this company to hire me. I remember I went for a job at Google, and I was convinced that if I got this job, my life would be amazing. And it was the coolest job. It was of the RAMP program, the rotational marketing position. I passed the first test. I flew out to Mountain View. I did 4 interviews. I got a call from the person. They said, this is almost never happens. All 4 of the people said they love you and they want you. There's this one final thing that you gotta do.
You just have to show you can do the job.
You just have to show that you understand marketing at all. I was like, no problem. And I wrote this essay, and that was it. I did not get the job. And at the time, I was at a company that I didn't want to be at. And this was Google in a rotational program that was going to get me to Ben in New York in 1 year in San Fran, 1 year in New York. Really heartbreaking. And then, of course, what happened? I quit my job 3 months later, lived on Ben's floor, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me. What I'm trying,
command was born.
Yes, and so what I'm trying to say is that I actually believe this. If you don't get this job, it might be the best thing that ever happens to you, because right now you're convinced that a gatekeeper is what's going to allow you to be happy. But even if you go to this particular government agency and you think you're doing good work, I promise you will have layers of bureaucracy above you telling you what to do. And you might be doing cybersecurity for some regime that you don't support, but we think is in the U.S.'s best interest. Versus if you just, like Ben said, do your own thing. And the point that you made, I don't want to operate in an organization driven by profit. We make a profit, we pay our employees, but we are not driven by profit. We're here on this podcast, which has right now no money coming to Ben or I. It goes all to Justin.
My man.
We make zero profit, but we get to because we want to do this. We make decisions all the time that cut off 20-30% of our profit, and we can afford to do that because we are the sole owners of this vehicle.
And it hurts every time.
And then Ben, every time the investment banker in Ben dies a little. But when you run your own thing, you are truly in control. And just to tie the last thing that Ben said, you're developing a skill that can be used in so many different ways, which is amazing because cybersecurity is going to be everything. So I would hope that we have shifted your feeling about that.
Yeah, no matter what happens, you'll be able to do what you love and help people. So
yeah. And I didn't get my dream job, and it turned out good. So I think it can happen for you as well.
I found a question that I thought was interesting. I don't know how I stumbled upon this. This was weeks ago, but it was about existentialism, and I just remembered it. There's a question: existentialism, your thoughts? My bet Charlie thinks life has no meaning. Ben doesn't feel as comfortable with that conclusion, but agrees. What are your thoughts on existentialism?
It's a big question, so let me remember. I took a class on this. So there's a lot of different existentialists. The one that I remember connecting with the most was, I'm going to butcher his name, Jean-Paul Sartre. And I also like Camus.
Do you want to define existentialism for people?
This is the difficulty of it. So what's the big thing? Existence precedes essence is one of the big things, and I know this is they talk in the worst ways. I wish
philosophy does do a really good job of making interesting conversations painful.
It's so practical. It's so practical, and so many of them talk in really difficult ways. So, one, philosophy is arising in historical context as a response to other things, but basically, God dies according to Nietzsche, and he dies in the public perception of this is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to orient ourselves towards our God. What now? And for a lot of people, that left a hole, a vacuum, because what you find is God was providing objective reasons in morality that were outside of any individual. And here was the stone tablets, and this is what you had to do. When there's none of that, people immediately thought, well, this is all meaningless.
Yeah. And I think provides a heaven and a hell, which I think is what my definition of existentialism, from my understanding, is that it is the idea of what do you do if life has no meaning, right? When there's a heaven or a hell, life has a meaning. It's a test, and when you pass, it's amazing, and when you fail, it sucks.
Yeah.
And so you'll live your life according to this meaning and you'll let it drive all your decisions, essentially, if you truly believed in heaven and hell. So the question is, what is the purpose of life? Why bother with anything if, at the end of the day, there's no heaven and hell, you die, you disintegrate, you are gone, the universe moves on, and for the next 100 billion years, it's like you were barely alive. You're a blip on the radar. The sun explodes, kills the earth. So why bother with anything? Why should I care about helping people when all of these people will be dead and there's no afterlife? That's my understanding of what existentialism is.
And that's one of the foundational questions. And what it does is it orients meaning from what was taken for granted, which is that it's given to you, it's objective, and it's unchanging, to there is none of that, and you get to set your own. And it's the project that you have of your life is to decide what this is and to adjust it and to tweak it. That meaning is a completely human construct, and it doesn't lose its value because of that. A lot of people, I think, initially, when maybe they're in a situation, I know this happened to me kind of, where they were raised in a semi-religious background and they come out of religion, and there's this sense of nihilism. Because you think that if meaning just comes from people, it's worthless. And existentialism is like, no, it's awesome that it just comes from people.
Yeah, this is what so nihilism, correct me if I'm wrong, is similar to existentialism, except the assumption is, therefore, nothing matters.
Yes,
right?
Therefore, who cares? Do whatever you want. Nothing is better than anything else in the final analysis. It's all going to hell and exploding in a supernova.
And for me, my take, because I'm agnostic, I've said that to people, right? So I don't necessarily think that I'm guaranteed meaning beyond my own life. Existentialism can actually be empowering. It doesn't have to be disempowering, because when something happens that you're upset about, you can stop and reflect and go, this is okay. I didn't get the woman that I want, or our revenue is down because of Corona, or whatever it is. You go, well, that's not the scorecard. That's not the meaning of life. I can decide what's important, right? So this stranger doesn't like me, or my bank account is down. I don't have to think that is the end of the world, or even something that needs to ruin my day, because I can decide my meaning. I can decide that going and hanging out with my friend sitting on the roof in sunlight can mean today was a great day, even if it's the same day that my crush rejected me and I lost half my money. So I find that existentialism can be empowering if you are willing to go through that mental exercise of, when you feel down, pausing to remember that meaning is what you create. And I think when it's depressing is when you only apply it to the good things. So when you lose money, you freak out, but then when you get money, you start to think, well, none of this matters.
Yeah.
Sure, then it can be disempowering. But that's, if you are an existentialist, that right there is the human choice that you have.
Yep. There's another thing, and I'm going to struggle to remember it, that I liked about Sartre, which is he talks about the roles that we play. And so you go to a cafe, there's a waiter there, and he serves you. To an existentialist, it's okay to play a role, but it's what Sartre called bad faith to think that that's the end of the story. To say that I am a waiter and that is everything. To forget that underneath that you are a free human being, and it has implications in how do you treat your waiter? Well, he's not just an automaton that serves you your food. This is a person underneath it all. And so it has implications to how we treat people of different status. It also has implications. A lot of people will say it's kind of the fixed mindset thing. They'll say, well, I am this. I am not smart. I am stuck in these particular circumstances. And a big thing of existentialism is recognizing that while, yes, there are circumstances that are not easily changed and sometimes impossible to change, there's always a freedom to choose how you interpret things. Now, I really liked that at the time, but as you know, if you've watched the podcast, I've since become more of a determinist. And so I don't wholly agree with that. There was this sense of freedom in existentialism, which I don't buy. I kind of think we're along for the ride of interpretation that is made up. So
no, it's funny, and I love it. I think existentialism is great. So it's funny because he thought you would be on board with it, and I would hate it. But no, it's the opposite almost.
Yeah, I am not into that freedom and responsibility, though I do in my daily life appear like I do.
No, and I think one of the most, weirdly enough, one of the most empowering beliefs you can have is that nothing outside of yourself, your own brain and beliefs is what determines how you experience things. I think that's incredible because you can use it to pull yourself out of bad situations, to appreciate the small joys in life. Yeah. I think it's great. And
I'm going to keep going because I love this. Sorry. I'm remembering everything now. So there's other good stuff. So I remember Simone de Beauvoir, who she wrote The Second Sex, which I think was exactly what is needed at the time, where she talks about how one of the big things is that everything was the masculine way of being, and then there was the other way, which was the female way of being. And she just pointed out that that was an arbitrary distinction, so that women were not considered necessarily considerate or empathetic. They were considered weak because in their relation to the masculine, they were not as strong or as emotionally consistent in the same, or whatever. I'm putting words in her mouth, but the basic thing that she pointed out at the time, which I think was true, is that we had this fixed point of what a man is, and then women were somehow seen to be inferior variations of that. And her point was that these are just two different ways of being, and I like that.
Landmark Forum has built a multi-million dollar business basically on just teaching people existentialism.
Yeah.
Like their whole thing is a 3-day journey to get you to feel positive existentialism, basically, instead of just having it as a thought for just a moment, to be able to actually take your worst traumas and apply your own meaning to them. That is the entirety of the first weekend of Landmark Forum. Yeah, no, it's a good point. And if you don't know what we're talking about and you're curious, it's very dense text, a lot of it, but the one thing I recommend is The Myth of Sisyphus by Camus. It's beautiful. You'll like it. It's really? Like 5 or 6 pages. Yeah, it's not that long. Never read it. So anyway, we'll move on. Hopefully that answered your question.
Next one is from Oliver. He says, I feel overwhelmed by every small criticism I receive. For example, last time I made a mistake during work, I got told off and was told that I should know better and to stop making these mistakes. Even though it was just something small, I felt terrible for not being able to do my task properly. So basically, my question is, how do I stop worrying about what other people's judgments are and start going easier on myself when I make occasional mistakes? Well, my initial reaction is, it's such a weird phrase, you should have known better. Meaning, well, how should I? And we often do that to ourselves. I should have done differently. What did I was operating on every bit of information and knowledge I had at the time, and this is what happened. Like, who should have? Should you have taught me? Should I have taken that lesson more seriously? Should my dad have taught me differently? Like, clearly, no, I shouldn't have known better. It turned out exactly as it should have. So I think that's one of the worst ways or I've mentioned this, but another great way to make yourself feel terrible is by saying what you should have done. Because
just doesn't make any sense. You did exactly what you should have done. You might not enjoy the outcome, but that was what you should have done given all the inputs.
So I was exactly what you're describing for everything, for every test that wasn't an A, for every critique from a boss. Yeah, it was kind of a long process for me. I think a lot of things helped. A lot of the stuff we talk about in emotional mastery was really helpful. Like there's this exercise, I'm going to kind of change it to fit this particular scenario, but there's this sense of that criticism to you means something beyond just that 1 5-second interaction. Because if you just thought it was that this person was mad at you for 5 seconds and then had completely forgotten about it and gone back to thinking you were a likable guy that they liked working with, you wouldn't feel bad about it, right? And so the exercise is you write out, and correct me if I'm wrong because you're doing the course, but you write out like so this person critiqued me for 5 seconds and said I should have known better. Okay, that's what happened on the left-hand side. Well, if that is true, then that means, and then you write what it means to you. And what it might mean to you is that you're a loser who's incapable of getting things right. Okay, well, if I'm a loser that's incapable of getting things right, what does that mean to me? Well, that means that I will always be poor and no one will love me and my parents will regret having me. And you just keep going down the chain. And then when you have it all written out, you look at it and you go, well, is this actually true? That if I made this one mistake, it means that I'm a loser who can't get anything right? No, I actually get things right quite frequently. This is just one error. Okay, well, even if I were a loser that got everything wrong, would it mean that I was a failure at life who my parents regretted having? Well, probably not. And you go through, and it's a longer thing. I'm not going to, jack everything that you're working on in the course.
No. I mean, this is cognitive behavioral therapy.
It's incredibly helpful to write it all down for two reasons. One, you see what's actually happening in your minds that is generating the feeling you're having. Because the feeling you're having is not that my boss criticized me for 5 seconds. The feeling you're having is I'm a complete failure that no one can love. And when you get down to that, one, just recognizing that relieves some of the feeling because you realize how absurd it is. Two, for me at least, you notice where the craziest jumps are, where the worst or least logical if-thens are, and that you can then try to rewire yourself to recognize isn't the case. Am I explaining this in a way that makes sense?
Yeah.
So like you'll write down 10 things or 6 things before you get to the fact that you're completely worthless and no one can love you, and that's what the feeling actually is. But you'll notice that one of the jumps in particular makes the absolute least sense, and by doing something like meditating on it, reflecting on it, journaling on it, you can break that one arrow. And so then you won't necessarily fall as far. Mm-hmm. And it's that, to me, that exercise is the most helpful in recognizing I'm not upset because this woman rejected me. I'm upset because I'm interpreting this woman rejecting me as meaning that I'm a complete loser who is unlovable, who doesn't deserve to have a life partner that makes him happy.
Yeah.
And that's why I feel terrible when I walk up to a woman and I say something that I think's cute and she doesn't want to talk to me. Mm-hmm. And when you can break that chain, then what you can actually react to is that a stranger in the bar didn't want to talk to you, which is not a big deal. Or a boss that has said compliments to you sometimes, or maybe never is and is always a dick, but who you don't really need to like you in order to be happy, has said something mean to you. When you can interpret what's happening for just what's happening, it immediately loses all of its power.
Yeah. And so that is the big question, is if anyone could really be present to the experience of their life, what happens is rarely, in the first world at least, bad in any significant sense.
Yeah, this
right?
is a guy made sounds at you for 5 minutes.
Exactly. So, but of course, that's not to deny that your experience of it could be very, very different from that. So, one, you might like the course Emotional Mastery because I try to approach this issue in many different ways. But if you're just interested in Ben's thing or it's out of your price point, he's talking about cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a day that we cover. And there's a book called Feeling Good, which goes into different cognitive behavioral therapy approaches to this. Part of the problem is that what is occurring is semi-cognitive, but it's also semi-emotional and semi-physical, meaning that you're carrying this interpretation with you everywhere you go. And cognitive behavioral therapy can be a great tool to use in those moments, but it often doesn't stop it from coming up. Like, it will still come up and you'll still have to dismantle it. So if you want to take more approaches to this, what you'll find is that this is a tip of an iceberg of this deep-seated belief that might be you're a failure, you're a loser, that might have gotten placed there very, very young.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of ways to come at that. I don't even know where to begin.
Yeah, no, but the good news is it is, I mean, if you do these exercises,
It'll help.
It can feel unsexy to go by emotional mastery or feeling good and do a 20-minute exercise a day. It can feel like, oh, I don't want to do that. That's not as fun as playing video games or playing basketball. But for myself, I'll tell you, I was the worst case of what you're describing, basically. And we got to the point now where something in our business happened that I think cost us, probably 5 figures, and it was because of me, and I'm not proud of it. And I was able to be like, cool, that did happen. I tried my best. I'll learn from it, and I don't hate myself, and I can have a good day and not think about it at night. And that's a transition from a guy who used to lay awake at night unable to sleep
with flashcards
because I was beating myself up. I was beating myself up for mistakes. So I guess my final message to anyone who does that is, this is something that does improve with effort, and the effort is worth it, and it will lead to more joy and less stress, and weirdly enough, better performance too.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Good stuff. Any other questions from
That's it.
Senor Justin? All right.
Oh, wow.
We did it. So we kept it in a reasonable time.
Yeah, it was quick. I thought we'd have way more questions.
Well, yeah. So we don't, no more questions?
I could ask
If you had one more, we can hop it. I think we have time today.
So this one is from Mardo he says, sometimes when I come up with a fun idea or plan in one of my friends groups other people get credit for it. For example, I recently proposed an idea to my friends that since it is our last year in school, we could build a cradle for the baby of a teacher who we are all really fond of and care about. The idea got picked up and we agreed we would talk about it once finals are closer. Now that the finals are close and the plan got brought up again, the idea got accredited to another person who just accepted the credit but knows I came up with the idea. This has happened in many different times in different scenarios, but the point remains. Should I interrupt the conversation and say the idea was thought of by me? And should I speak with the person who took the idea and the credit, or should I just let it go? I have always let others take the credit in these cases because I feel like I would come out as the bad guy if I said anything, but I do wish to be acknowledged for the things that I think of. What is the right thing to do? Should I keep quiet or should I put my foot down?
Oh, this is so hard because this person's in high school?
It sounds like high school or college.
Yeah, so I don't know that I have the right answer to this one because I think the right answer at different stages in your life is literally the opposite thing. There is a stage in your life, and I suspect the younger you are, the more this is the case, and the shyer you are, the more this is the case, where having a private conversation with the person and letting them know is important because it builds that sense of self-advocacy. Not because you're getting the credit, not because receiving the credit is important, but because standing up for yourself is an important step thing to do. Then there's a stage later in life, depending on where you are at, where the correct answer is to sit back and enjoy that person who clearly desperately needs the credit because they were willing to take credit that they didn't deserve, got it. And to recognize that you already have everything you need. Receiving credit is not going to improve your life in any significant way. Somebody got a cradle. Somebody got to feel good. You got to be with your friends. What a win.
Yeah.
And I think you're probably in the first phase, given your age, but it's tough.
Yeah. We're so different. You and I are so different sometimes. So I actually was going to give slightly different advice, which wasn't going to be have a one-on-one conversation.
What were you going to say?
So I was going to say there's two things in my mind that I would do. One is actually similar to what you said. Enjoy that your idea got picked up, right? Like you wanted to make a cradle with your friends and you got to. If I suggest paintball and then we all go paintballing and I get to play paintball with my friends and everyone's like, great idea, Charlie. It's like, I got what I wanted. This is almost better for me. I like the Machiavellian. I liked the idea of incepting my friends.
I got to give you credit here. You are very good at knowing your priorities. And so some people will have a priority which is like, I don't know, get credit or something, and or be seen as the mastermind. And you always were like, no, I want a physical outcome. Like I want us to go to this place. And if I have to convince everyone else that it was their idea and they get the pat on the back, whatever. We went to the place that I wanted to go to.
Yeah, that's my best case scenario. I want to go paintballing and I convince all my friends that it was their idea to go
hiding
paintballing.
Under the radar.
And then what I would even do is afterwards, I'd be like,
this was for you.
Guys, no, I'd be like, guys, that was a great idea. Because then I'd make them feel even better because I want to go paintballing a second time. I'd be like, dude, Charlie, that was a great idea. Like, we should definitely go paintballing more often. And then you feel good. Yeah. You don't really remember whose idea it was. But you're like, when we go paintballing, everyone thinks that I'm cool and I get to feel good. And then I just get to sit there like little Machiavelli and be like, so same time next week then, guys. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think there are people, our friend Austin is like this, that will just get credit for jokes or plans or whatever because they have the reputation of being an awesome person, even if it's not their idea. I'd say rather than go have a one-on-one conversation with this person, try to become that type of person. Try to, I would say, why aren't I getting credit for these ideas? Is it because I say them really quietly and then someone else near me hears the idea and repeats it, and then that's who gets credit because they say it loudly? Am I not getting credit because in general the group doesn't have a high opinion of me? I would go more towards basic charisma basics and just go, okay, forget about credit. I'm just going to try to be popular, fun, funny, someone that people like being around. And then I'm going to get the credit because I'll have this higher general command of respect in the group.
Yeah.
So that's what I would do. I wouldn't worry so much about
fair point,
having a serious one-on-one with someone, because who cares? I mean, obviously you care. I'm not trying to diminish it, but this one instance of credit for the cradle, I think actually won't make you as happy if you got credit for the cradle. That would not make you as happy as if you became the person in the group who was given credit for his ideas because your standing in the group had risen. I actually think that would make you happier. So for your own sake, I would pursue one of those two, either just getting people to do what you want and then getting the joy of the activity, or switching to being more fundamental in terms of what kind of body language, tonality, interactions, jokes will make me a leader and popular, and then I'll get the credit because people will know that I'm the one saying it, and they'll remember.
That's a good point, is that for certain people it's going to be easier to strip them of credit because they don't have the standing in the group. But you mentioned our friend Austin. I can't imagine that ever happening to him. It would only flow in the direction of him getting credit for things he didn't deserve. No one, if he had said something, it would have stuck in your brain.
You remember he said it because his delivery was loud, confident, with great posture and body language. When you think back to where did that idea come from, you remember Austin delivering it.
Yep.
And
so, you assume that, of course, Austin, he's the cool guy.
Yeah, of course.
He's the cool one.
He's the team captain. Of course it came from him. So I would, if I were you, I would either just embrace your Machiavellian ability to get people to do things that you like doing, like making cradles or paintballing, or I'd switch into how do I fundamentally forget about credit and just up my charisma such that I will naturally receive my credit.
Cool. You got 3 options. Take the one that
take either of my 2.
Take the one that feels the most right. And I think that's it. Dope. All right, guys. Cool. Thank you so much.
Thanks
thank you again
for watching. Yeah. Thank you all our patrons for making this happen.
You guys are huge. So depending on where we're at, if we're at $300 a month, it'll be 1 a month. $600 will be 2 a month. I think $900 is 1 every 10 days or something, and then 12 would be 1 a week. So if you want to contribute, we super appreciate it. We do sometimes have some conversations going on in the Patreon as well about topics.
Bonus points. Your question's way more likely to get answered if you're now, because Justin has been told to prioritize patron questions. So, and he will, because all the money goes to him. So incentives are aligned.
So and either way, we appreciate everyone watching. We appreciate all of our patrons. We appreciate our biggest and our smallest and the people who just are here to hang out. So hope you guys have a wonderful day, and we'll catch you all next time.